All right, I'm going to call to order tonight's meeting of the Finance Committee. It's Thursday, April 14th, 2022. The time is 4:30. We are having a hybrid meeting tonight, some of us in the City Council office and some of us virtual. So I'm going to do roll call first in the council chambers here, and I'm Laura McNally, Fifth Ward City Council person and chairwoman. I'm going to go to my right here.
Kyle Mizak, Finance.
Charles Shasho, Public Works.
Samantha Turner, Third Ward City Council.
Anita Davis, Sixth Ward City Council and Committee Member.
Carl Davis, Chief of Police.
Jeff Lumi, Law Director. So like that, WFMJ. John Alberti, Youngstown Police.
Pat Rosenthal, Director of Commonwealth.
Jim Hunter, Sustainability Director of Commonwealth.
Mike Ray, Fourth Ward Councilman.
Jennifer Ozinger, Assistant Clerk.
And then we have virtual Basha Adamczak, 7th Ward City Council, and Jimmy Hughes, 2nd Ward City Council. Yeah, yes. I know, right?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's everybody covered. You're gonna talk extra loud so that the TV can also pick up our voices as well as the microphones. Just FYI, and that's why we're all sitting down here. So first up is going to be, we've got a couple ordinances in front of us, and we're gonna start here with ordinance 2256. This piece, it's our annual citywide street resurfacing. We were holding on to it during the budget season in hopes that there might be some extra money at the end of the budget to put towards it. That did not turn out to be the case, so it's time to move this forward so we can get started. Does anyone have any final questions on it or comments? Anita?
Wish list, Kyle. Is there any more money for us?
Through the chair. As you saw from the budget that we passed, based on what the forecasted revenues were, no.
Okay.
But we have set aside some of the ARP funds in hopes of being able to use those monies to balance our 2023 budget. If by the end of the year, the city is able to, in essence, meet its obligations with its revenue forecast and there is excess, I will identify that excess so that when we talk about the 2023 budget, if we did better in revenue collections, I will highlight that at the end of 2022 so that you are aware of that. And so we will then look at how we want to address the budget in 2023 and keeping in consideration that there was excess revenue. If it materializes, we can talk about that.
Chuck?
I have two things. On the council agenda for this week coming up, you're going to see a piece of legislation to authorize going out for bids and entering into a contract for paving through wastewater. But essentially what we did is we pulled out some of the streets that we had major sewer repairs on, and I calculated that number to be, I want to say it was about 400,000 or so. If we do that, if he has approved that, then essentially what we'll be able to do is just basically add that to resurfacing under one contract. It'll be paid through a different fund. We'll have two authorizing legislations for that item because we're going to just do one bidder so we can get some value in of quantity. So that's essentially how we're going to be doing that. That being said, as we move forward, I can tell you that when we put down, when we pay by cubic yard of asphalt. So if you could, it's 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. That's 1 cubic yard. So we quantify that throughout our estimating. When we give you guys prices, we say, okay, you're going to have this many 200 cubic yards on this road, 50 cubic yards on this road, whatever it is, based on the length and the width and the thickness. Typically, when I first started here 20 years ago, we were putting down 10,000 cubic yards. So this time I think we're putting down, and I have stretched it, and we're putting down about 6,000 cubic yards. So that's almost almost half. The price of asphalt was about $76 per cubic yard when I first started working here. It is now I'm estimating that we're gonna get a price of about $150 a cubic yard. Our budget has stayed the same for all intents and purposes. We used to have a $1.1 million project in the year 2000 when I had more hair and I started working here. And here we are in 2022, and our budget is now 1.3 million. So it just goes to show you, when you look at your streets and you see 4 streets on your list, I'm embarrassed. It's just, sometimes I even give you guys these lists. If you're like, I have 4 streets, I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the price of asphalt just keeps going up and up and up, but our budget isn't. So I know that sometimes it's not an easy fix. I know that there's sacrifices that need to be made, and it's all about allocation, and we only have so much money in the pot. But that's the reality that we're facing, and I can't change that. So.
Chuck, anything from council members who are virtual? Anything, Samantha?
Yes, just one question. You said there are some streets that need to be paved that have major sewer projects,
Yes.
and sewer projects are permissible by ARP, right? Yes.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No,
Kyle?
through the chair. We have in committee with Mike and with Councilman Davis discussed if some of these could ultimately be quantified and then meet that qualifying component, so that if it's possible and those projects are under one contract where we actually identify so many replacements, it is possible those areas where those construction projects occur, we could potentially, under the cost of fixing that, be able to correct that pavement. But it's going to be limited to scope. We can't be doing the whole street if we're only potentially doing 1 or 2 catch basins. But if there's numerous catch basins and a bunch of the road needs to be addressed, we could potentially address some of that and expand on our paving to cover that. But it has to be individually looked at on each street because of us having to make sure we live within the qualifying guidelines of ARP.
To be through the chair, to be clear, this legislation you're going to see on Monday is for sewer work that already happened,
Right.
and they just tore the road up completely. So we're going back and fixing the road now. That's different from the ARP. The sewer work would have to be in the contract, and we would have to pay one vendor. So I think maybe we'd possibly look at, if anything, would be to use the wastewater money for this paving because it's more liberal in how we can use it, and then maybe if we have catch basin projects or sewer work, then maybe I'll possibly look at the ARP funds to do the physical sewer work, so you're actually doing sewer work with ARP funds. So you would basically swap that money.
Through the chair, right, as Chuck clarified, these are projects that we're talking about utilizing wastewater that we've already have put in place. Now we're talking about fixing the roads. So this would be a charge off through legislation to wastewater to pay for that.
Thank you.
Anita?
I don't want to tie it up, but, so what, out of curiosity, how much of the road would have to be ripped up to do one of these wastewater projects to qualify?
I would say if we were doing any long line type sewer, like feet of sewer, like just thinking not in one spot, or doing a catch basin on one catch basin on the road, probably not. So this is where we've done extensive damage. Maybe the catch basins have washed the road out, so the base is settled. Then what happens is that base, the water flows under the asphalt and it propagates under the road, and then it just kind of the whole road settles. So
Makes it all
clears
sink
the
in.
base up.
Any other questions on this piece? Okay. Move on to ordinance here number 2273. This was proposed a while back by the administration as well, to use ARP funds to reimburse ourselves for COVID-related health things. Are there further questions here, or Kyle, anything changed since you first brought this to us?
Through the chair. We have seen our costs go higher, which is for calendar 2022. United Healthcare is providing me with documentation of costs that has been incurred since the start of the new calendar year. Right now, I'm asking for the reimbursement of costs associated prior to the start of 2022. So this would be taking the funds and actually inserting this money back into, which is a separate fund, for our self-insured. What this would mean is, if in the future we had cases where our out-of-pocket costs were dramatically high, we potentially would have to raise our rates to recover these dollars to put back into the fund. We've had outlays of this amount of money, meaning we have paid from our fund to hospitals and doctors this month. So by putting these monies back into that fund, we are in essence increasing that kitty. Or hope that in the future, if higher medical costs come in for, say we have a number of employees that have cancer, we potentially could see that fund, it's not ever going to get depleted, but it could be lower where we then would have to potentially raise rates. And those rates, when you think about it, 10% is paid by the employee, 90% by the city. So by putting these funds back into that special fund, we are at least putting a safety harness in that fund so that if there is a case of that, we're not going to have to immediately change or come to council and ask for rate increases on our medical insurance. This at least provides us with a buffer by reimbursing us for costs that were associated directly with COVID-19.
Kyle, is this something that, again, that you'll be doing for the calendar year 2022?
Through the chair, I will at least inform you as we get closer, like by mid-year, I'll tell you what we've incurred. So at least I'll keep you up to speed on how much we've expensed through it. It'll be a decision of, one, the administration putting it forth in front of you, and two, council deciding do they want to fund the additional cost. And the question's going to be, if we see a resurgence in the fall or anytime over the course of the year, we maybe want to consider that. But if we hope, and like we're all praying that this doesn't occur, we may not need to rely on the ARP to replenish that if the costs are, they're reasonable. We just have to wait and see what we're going to incur between the start of this calendar year, and we'll look at it by mid-June, and then I'll bring up the speed, and then we'll look at it by the end of the year, and we'll see what we've incurred. But it is our responsibility, because that we're self-insured, to pay these costs. Remember, we're not paying premiums, so we're not going to see any markup. These are actual costs associated with people having some type of COVID-19 that are either employed by the city or are family members of city employees.
Are there any questions? Virtual. Questions from the table, Anita?
To the chair, Cal, if you know it, in the private world, what is the employer-employee breakdown for this company? Ours is 10 and 90?
Through the chair. It's going to fluctuate, but typically, when you talk to most private employers, they're asking their employees to pick up 40%. Yes.
Thank you.
Samantha?
Thank you. So this is 2021?
Through the chair, yes, because remember, we started with United Healthcare in February. So this is February 1 through December 31st of 2021 costs.
Okay, and in addition to this, 650, was that almost 400 that we reimbursed for other COVID-related expenses that were not associated with medical? We just did that. We just requested ARP funds to reimburse for COVID-related expenses, and you had to have it in by a certain date.
Oh, through the chair. No, that is what is considered our revenue loss.
So I understand, so that was what? How much was that?
Almost 4 million.
Okay, so that 4 million, so that takes us to let's just call it 5 million that we would be reimbursing ourselves at this point, COVID-related costs as well as medical expenses.
Yes, if you were to pass this, yes, I'm probably saying it's close to $5 million, yes.
Any other questions?
Can I just clarify one
Go ahead,
thing?
Kyle.
This money would be going back into the health insurance fund, which is not touched for anything other than paying health insurance costs associated with billing. So this money is not commingled with anything. This stays in that fund and would only be put back in that fund under the request of this ordinance.
No, I understood, thank you for giving that, thank you. I was just trying to track how much that's coming back to us. So, us as in the city and not going, so that's the question, thank you.
did. I understand that this money was to replace 10 of our unmarked cars that are used, specialized units. I understand that some of these vehicles are 10 years older or older. We like to replace them with some newer used cars. I have Detective Sergeant Alberti who can give you a clear breakdown on the number of vehicles and how he arrived at this $100,000 figure.
Anita?
Before he goes there, when these officers are working side jobs, I want to have assurances that these cars are not being taken to work these private jobs. Chief?
Okay. Through the chair, when these guys are working some of those side jobs, they pay for the side job. The employer pays for the cruiser.
I know that, but there's other side jobs, through the chair. But there are other side jobs in which they are not paying for the cruisers, particularly if they work any kind of establishment with serving liquor and things like that, and those other jobs. What I want to make sure is that our city vehicles are not being utilized going back and forth by the officers who are not on call, not on duty, okay, and being utilized there. Because there's a liability that's involved when they're going back and forth to and from their homes, driving our city vehicles.
Kyle, do we have like a city policy on vehicles in general? Because it seems like it wouldn't just be for these 10 cars, it would be for any vehicle, that, is owned by the city. Do we have like an internal policy on allowable uses of vehicles? Like I know, for instance, you're not allowed to maybe have say someone's in the water department vehicle, they're not allowed to have their kid in there with them, or something like that.
Through the chair, I'm aware there is an ordinance that identified who could have vehicles. The law department had looked into it about 2 years ago, and there was work done by the law department of quantifying the number of vehicles being used by departments. I'm sure Jeff and his staff have that information. That would have to be reviewed by the law department to determine what the actual language says. And if there is going to be any change, it would require modifying and amending that language. But that language ultimately is what we should be following, because that is approved by council through ordinance. And at the time, in the past, we were reviewing it. The mayor did ask us at our last staff meeting he has requested that the department heads provide him with a listing of all of the vehicles that we have in our inventory. And so I know that is something that he's waiting upon us to provide to him. So I guess what would best answer that is there has to be some additional research to that question.
Okay.
And if that's something that is going to come out of the committee needs to task the finance department and then the law department to, in essence, come back to you with that information.
Anita, sorry, I looked at you first. I looked at you and said your name, sorry.
A quick follow-up. So, to Attorney Limbian, you're looking into that. Could you see if there's any kind of restrictions about these take-home cars and when they're allowed to drive them? Because I am concerned about our liability with these cars going to and from, and in particular with the individuals who are not residents of the city, because it's not benefiting the residents of the city with the take-home cars going back and forth, particularly on side jobs, whether it be police cars or whatever the vehicles might be. Because street department people have trucks and all kinds of folks have trucks.
Chuck?
Through the chair, I am aware that there are different classifications set by ordinance for positions. There is a B, which is you basically drive a city vehicle during work, a fleet vehicle, if you will. There's A, which is you have back and forth privileges to take it home and come back. And then there's AA, which is 24-hour access to the vehicle within 50 miles of the city.
Anita?
So I'll follow up to the chair too, Attorney Lincoln. I want to make sure that thing is locked down because again, 24 hours and it's on while they're working somebody else's side job. Not benefiting the city, but a private entity. That's something that we should not be picking up. We need to clean that thing up.
Okay, Samantha and Julius.
Thank you. We spent several months on take-home vehicles, did we, with the police department? I'm just asking, did we come through with that, with something on this, or are we still working on it?
We didn't change it, so that's why I wanted Attorney Lincoln to pick it back up and let's get back on it. Because we go around and around and around. And I'm well aware that, my own old position, but as a police officer, because I had a take-home car, okay, and I drove it almost 24/7, but I also resided in the city, and whenever I was driving that car, I was also looking. So there is a difference for individuals who have take-home cars who live inside the city, because if they're going to a side job, they're going to be looking because they live here. They're going to be 24/7, just constantly on the lookout. And those, once they get outside the city, what are they looking for? That's why I want to have it looked at.
Julius and then Attorney Lemon.
Samantha kind of asked the question for me, and I was just going to state that one of the benefits of a take-home vehicle for me is that vehicle being in a neighborhood, basically better secure in that neighborhood. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for Youngstown City, police cars to be, making Austintown, Boardman, and Poland feel more secure. Meanwhile, that could be a benefit that Youngstown citizens should be receiving. So my question was the same: what happened to that conversation in the safety committee?
Attorney Lemon.
Thank you, through the chair. I don't want to blame everything on COVID, but we were poised to make significant changes right before the pandemic hit, as I remember historically what happened. In addition to that, I think the ordinance was originally drafted at a time when there was a residency requirement. And since that has shifted, I don't think the automobile issue was ever accurately or thoroughly addressed. And absolutely, not that it's my place to concur with any member of council, but I certainly appreciate your position that we need to drill down hard on kind of the flagrant use of vehicles far and wide when they should be city functioning vehicles.
So there is something though in writing that could be provided to us to review at a committee meeting and build from there?
Through the chair, yes, the original ordinance, yes, absolutely. And then we have a considerable file we pulled together all of the information about all of the vehicles. Once again, this was pre-COVID, but all the cars that everybody had and whether they fell into that B, A, or double A scenario, and maybe how there may have been some misimpressions about what some people's powers and rights were.
Okay, we can make then that request to take that item up, and can we get back to the actual ordinance here then, if that's okay, because that's that has to be addressed as a whole. So on the ordinance here, are there any other things coming through with this $100,000 or any other questions related to this $100,000 here, Anita?
Through the chair, I can not have an objection if I have the assurances of the police chief that he'll issue the directives that are needed to make sure that if they have take-home cars going outside the city, that they're not being utilized on their side jobs. Chief?
That's something, through the chair, that's something we will review. I'll speak to Lieutenant Butler, our staff commander, and we'll review that and go over it.
Well, if that's the case, then I'll wait for your review.
Through the chair.
Samantha?
Yes, I just wanted to know how you came to 10,000 per car, or how you
So,
get the price range.
excuse me for using the phone, but I actually just took I took a couple photos of one of the places we were talking about using the per purchasing the cars through. So just a couple snapshots of, so looking up the vehicles that we currently have, like Ford Focuses, which are really small vehicles, are not the best police related, but they're adequate. So for instance, a 2017 Ford Focus with 99,000 miles on it is $9,400. So looking through this, I mean, I could just keep rattling off. Same with the Impalas. I mean, this is not a good used car time, but just clicking through what the sale was last week between outfitting, and again, like I said, the unmarked cruisers, it's not like there's a $5,000 light package in that. It's just enough to get, minimal emergency running. So again, you're talking anywhere between 8,000 and 10,000 just for the vehicle, and then you could get up in towards of a couple thousand to outfit.
So through the chair, Councilwoman Davis, I know that you have reservations. Ultimately, we're not going to get probably 10 cars. We're probably going to get less, because again, when you look at where costs are, and then having to then change that car and make it amenable to actually be used by police department, we're probably talking less than maybe 5 or 6.
5 or 6?
Yes, because we're going to have to look, as Detective, I don't want to say John, Alberti said, right now, costs are much higher than they've typically been. So they're going to take their time and look for vehicles just go out there and buy 10 cars. We're talking about getting things that aren't going to be in the best interest of the city. So it's our hope that you would pass this so that when something is available and we have the appropriations in place, we're not passing it up. I don't think it's in our best interest to go out there and try to buy all these at the same time. But over the course of the year, having those dollars available means when something does appear on the horizon that makes sense, without this, they're not going to be able to buy it. And I think it's something that we can work towards with the law department, the finance department, and the administration as a whole, working with council, getting you some answers so that you can work on a larger policy. But I hate to see that this hinder us if something does come available and it's in our best interest to buy it. Without these appropriation dollars, we're not going to be able to do that.
Do we appropriate this already in the budget, in the police department's budget?
Through the chair, this is a different funding source. So this is separate of that funding that, again, council or the administration has to come back to you to spend those dollars. So you still control how we spend those dollars. Okay. Even though you passed it in the budget.
Right. Did we already allocate?
You did
account for it in the budget?
Yes, you did. But what we're finding is if they're going to want to probably buy those 7 new vehicles, this 100 that is in there for use is probably not going to be available because the prices keep going up. Mm-hmm. And so when we end up buying those 7, we're going to be dipping into that money in the budget. And so it's not even going to be, some of it will be there, but it's not going to be there like what we hoped it would be when we passed the budget or when we started talking about the budget last fall.
I'm going to check online. Anyone virtual with questions? Or I come back to the table. Okay. Julius?
Thank you, Commissioner. I know money is tight and the used car market is crazy, there it is. But the question is how much use do you plan on getting out of these cars? When are you going to come back to council to get more of the same cars for,
So,
and the reason I'm asking is because you said the cars that 99,000 miles on this Ford Focus, me being a car guy, you're gonna need another car for real quick, depending on the type of usage, if they're driven hard or whatever. So how long are these vehicles expected to last for the use that you'll be using?
So that's to the chair. I'm not a car person, so I've been trying to pick up on this and this the one website that I use. It kind of gives me an idea of the miles. So first off, on the front end, it seems like the newer cars, the miles really stretch out. Just because, like, I'm looking at some of these newer, was looking at Explorers like 17, 18s, 19s, and they're going up to almost 200,000 miles. So it seems like these cars are actually running way longer than what they normally have in the past, just because of technology. But you are right, so it's a mix. getting a 100,000-mile car, ooh, that's tough. You're already almost starting out in the arrears, but that's what the market is. I feel like that's a little high, but then you're gonna pay more money, so it's a balance. The other part is we taking over these garage operations, this year. The other part of the plan is to start servicing the vehicles that we have on a way, way better maintenance program, timing. So the next plan for the department is, I've talked to Chief about this, and like Kevin Flynn, Buildings and Grounds talking about getting a citywide maintenance program. So these cars are coming up, when it's time for an oil change, they get it, brakes for all. So again, front end, try to get the best we can. The back end is improve the overall maintenance program in general, trying to keep these on the road longer. That's the ultimate goal for us. So,
Samantha?
Thank you. So you said 8 to 10 for the car. How much is to outfit a car approximately?
I would say through the chair, it varies. It varies wildly. So like we repurposing, so like the old cars that we have now, a lot of that stuff will come out and go in the new ones because it still could be repurposed. Our mechanics would do the work. Once you get through that, or we have some lights, we're actually still using lights that are like a candle in the window, as opposed to the new strobes and different things. So those get a little pricier. You can run into anywhere from minimally to $1,000, and so you're talking $500,000. It just depends on a lot of variables, but I'm going to say around that $500,000.
Okay. Thank you. And so you said the 100,000 should get us about 10 cars. How many cars do we need to get rid of? How many cars do we actually need? How many is just or that's already crashed and over there that if we could buy, how many do we need? Is that we have that?
Well, through the chair, so again, we are making what I would say a super diligent effort to try to get a handle on this. Coincidentally, we just did a full-blown drive your car into the police station by division on Wednesday, to actually start going through by VIN, by mileage, by year of the car. So we have Crown Vics, and I looked this up. The last year Crown Victoria was produced was in 2011. We have Crown Victorias, probably 20, which are, I'm talking 08, 07. So we're never going to replace out in 2 years what we have on the books now. But we just took 2 out of service the other day. The frames were on. So 2 cars should be deployed.
And this is in our unmarked?
Those are the unmarked. Those were the Crown Victorias. So again, this is a years-long process.
And how many unmarked do we have total?
Again, I wish we don't have the inventory done, but rudimentarily, just from looking at what we by different registrations and stuff, we were around 70 vehicles.
Wow.
It was.
Okay, thank you.
Anita?
To the chair, it's your directive that I want to make sure that these cars are not being utilized on side jobs and things by people going outside the city. It's important that we get control of this. And it's in your hands. You're the king.
I'll speak to him.
You're the boss. You're the chair.
Yeah.
In all honesty. Consulting with your head of internal affairs and everything else is all well and good, but the power lies with you. The power lies with council up there and take this thing forward, but the power also lies with you to set out the mandates and requirements of how they're utilized within your department. You're the power. You are the power.
Any questions, virtual? Any questions at the table? All right. Those are the 3 pieces of legislation that are on our agenda for tonight in actual legislation form. Thank you for those. The next that we have on here is our ARP funding allocation for parks and playgrounds. This is on here because of the ARP committee requested council to give individual requests to the Parks Department prior to the Parks Department going in front of the ARP committee. And so this is an opportunity for council to do just our own internal work here and decide or discuss what our individual requests were and where we can combine efforts for, you know, how much we need to set aside for our projects. So I know many of us have mentioned specific projects already.
My apologies to the chair.
Yes, I don't know if anybody, I know I sent in a request, I don't know if anybody else did, but maybe we can just talk through those. Mike?
Yeah, one thing, and we were talking about parks, right?
Yes.
If I may, just on the last meeting that Anita and I attended with the ARP committee, we were talking about, you know, all these park requests, but I think one thing that I think Nita and I, she can tell me if we disagree or not, but was that before we go down a road and talk about funding some of these, what's our standard for what a park should be and what should everyone have? I mean, there's boards with no parks or parks that are less than optimal, and before, you know, someone's getting, you know, a swimming pool or something else, do we have, you know, equity across that? Or do we all have, you know, what's the minimum standard of what it should look like? And there's a park plan, you know, and Don referenced that and said, you know, well, Anita's ward has an influx of people. Is it a significantly statistical influx? Did 12 more people move into the 6th ward? I'm just using it as an example, I'm just being dramatic. So before that, but what looks correct? So before we fund anything, I think this is a chance to fix the deficiencies we have. That would be my burden before we go down that path. You know, what does a park plan look like? And then, you know, I think we had Hunter chime in from the planning perspective. You know, you can pass a standard of what your park should look like. And maybe that's something we should consider. I know we have to do it quickly, but I just give me that background before we could have a wish list. You know, Julius might want zip lines. You know, and I want a swimming pool, but if Anita doesn't have swings, I mean, are we going to really, you know, say, Julie? I don't know. We're saying some of it is just, you know, just at the discretion of, or the pleasure of this body, saying how we want to spend the funds we've allocated. And I guess there's a certain portion where we can entertain that, but if we're talking about overall what the park system should look like, I think that should be, sorry, I didn't mean to go on too far, but did I capture what we talked about, Anita, a little bit?
It's what it is what we talked to the chair, it is what we talked about, but what I was hoping that we could do today is not about individual projects, but that we could discuss how much we want to look at setting aside so that after the finding that comes in, we could address it. But not addressing the individual, like, you know, I want $350,000, but I don't expect to see that addressed here today. But I would like to see if we can get some sort of ballpark figure what we think we might need, and then let our ARP committee do its part with the bigger thing. You cool with that, Mike?
Yeah, can I respond to that directly? Also looking at, I think one thing we asked the committee to produce, and I haven't seen that finally produced, was taking the survey results, which were community youth violence prevention, housing and neighborhood, commercial corridors, public utility infrastructure, parks and public facilities, and local economic recovery, and dividing the money up based on the categories of priority, you know, so we can compare that, you know. If the survey said 25% of the money should go towards that, should we fund that accordingly? You know, kind of looking at those funding options. Sorry.
Okay.
If I went off,
Yeah. I agree with that. That's what this is, like, what is, like, how you said, what should our basic park look like? What should the city be just they're basically funding out of ARP to fix our parks or make our parks equal across the city, and then our individual ward money is there for if you want your swimming pool or you want your zip line or whatever it is. improvements, the enhancements on those things, you know, that we need to come to some type of agreement, because it's my understanding that the Parks Committee went in and asked for $20 million of ARP funding at the last ARP meeting, but what's in there? I don't know. Anything that,
I'm looking at Mike, because when I heard that, I was like, I didn't hear that figure. It was a high figure though, because I was like, huh? But I'm not remotely considering the idea of, I won't say thrown away, because that's not the right way, because our playgrounds are important, but if that figure was in someone's head, they need to get it out of their head. You know,
If you went by though, I think by survey results, it'd be roughly, I think, and don't anyone hold me to this, but I think it's like around 13 million or something, like if we divided it up by percentage. There's different ways you can slice it, and there's a couple, we're asking for a couple different scenarios, because when you talk about youth violence, crime prevention, that's tied into parks, so there is overlap. So that's why getting a couple options and having that, so we could look at and pick from that and say, okay, if we spend money on parks, we're investing in youth. And that brings that down where they're from the same categories. And I'm not trying to overcomplicate, but it is, you know, you can't just say violence gets this, you know, crime prevention gets this and parks get this, because they do share.
I'm in agreement with you, and I still think 13 is a little high, but you know, I'm just one voice, but I do think we need to take think about addressing that, doing that kind of figure. This is high, I think.
how do you divide that up between, like, replacing broken equipment or removing unsafe things versus, you know, building something completely new, you know? But Julius?
That was basically kind of my question. Just for the record, I think that the Parks Department is very important. Like Mike was saying, crime prevention and youth is all kind of what I'm saying. But just for the record, then the request for ARP funding, that description of what needs to be done to the park wasn't clearly laid out in there. Because I know what I need in Falls Playground. But that doesn't mean, like Michael already said, that it's just the same as everybody else's playground. But that description for across the city wasn't laid out. Because it's a lot of money to ask for without totally laying that out.
Samantha?
Thank you. So I agree with Councilman Ray and with everyone here at the table, but just a month ago, we had had WashU come and give us the parks analysis that was just done. And it spoke to a lot of what we're talking about today, the need for us to have a master plan across the parks so that we can, one, create equitable change, the need for a park in the sixth ward. Like, it was blatant. When we put the map up on the screen, you could just see the neighborhoods that are growing, and the numbers are all the numbers are in the analysis, because it has to be done after the census. You see the neighborhood growing, but you see a huge gash, but no park there. And then they went through as far as taking pictures of the parks that are in disrepair and the buildings that are in disrepair. And something that came out of that last parks meeting was we need to create a master plan for our park system so that we can, one, have more equitable change across them, and we can set a standard, and then of course work on individual things that each neighborhood needs. So what we would like to do, and I understand that there is an urgency for us to set aside dollars for the Parks Department, but I think we should begin to move forward with our community partners in developing this master plan, because it's the same, what we're talking about, the same things. There's needs on every side of town. Everybody had an issue with the park, and when we were going through the analysis, it was even more apparent when you're looking at the map that we have issues with our park, whether it's entrance from one side of the park to the other, or the fact that whole neighborhoods are without parks. So
I think there is a large conversation here, but I understand the need to go ahead and set dollars aside so they can start tackling those smaller things. And I'm not disparaging the removing that equipment, but tackling those things while we build the master plan in order to move forward.
Can I see if anyone online has anything first? Anyone online want to comment? Yeah, okay. Joyce?
So that's what I'm saying, that the plan that YSU did, is that part of the ARP request from the Parks Department?
No, this is the city parks and open green space. We got this from, John Relich did it. So we got this separate, and we saw this in the parks meeting, because we're reviewing parks. The next meeting will review the properties, so, yeah, so this is completely separate. The information that she had was just what, and this is my understanding, is just what she's asked us individually, what we need, kind of what we want to see at our parks and our neighborhoods, and what they've seen. So if you haven't provided the director with what you want to see, then it may not have appeared in her conversation. I'm not sure. I wasn't.
I think this conversation needs to be, though, like you said, realistic. Our request, the idea was that we were all on the same page as to what our requests were. If the city should have, and this is an example, the city should absolutely remove anything be responsible for removing anything that's a danger. Number one, we fund that no matter whose park it is. The city should absolutely be responsible for making sure there's some type of seating at the park. I don't know, I'm just throwing examples out there. Okay, everybody gets that. But if you want a walking trail at your park, that's your own enhancement, say, because that's not necessarily an equitable thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, just a bare bones to make sure that those needs, those basic needs, are taken care of first in this ARP funding request from the Parks Department. And then, the rest of whatever Parks and the ARP committee wants to do, they can go ahead and do. But we need to make sure that our parks are getting just the bare basics are getting in there, because I don't think they are. I think that plan is too broad. I don't know what she brought to you guys, what I thought was also very broad. So, what are those standards so that we are all asking for the same basic needs from her? Do you know what I mean, Julius?
Mine is Jimmy and Samantha. We all went on that tour of the city parks. Bob Burke. I think we all got a pretty good idea of what needs to happen. And even when we give these funds, it's like my question, which I'm in support of it, but it's like, how much? But what's to say once we put all new equipment in these parks and the parks are all beautiful, what keeps them from getting back to the way they look right now? Is that, is that in the plan too? You know what I mean? Is that going to be part of everything? Like, how do you maintain this brand new beautiful park if that's not what's happening right now? Just a question.
Kyle?
The chair, I think it needs to almost be like a two-pronged approach. I think Julius raises a very important question. How are you going to maintain the park system when there's there's areas where there's not enough parks, and then there's areas where there's too many parks that are requiring the park department to maintain them. So, in essence, what has to be done, and it's going to be some tough decisions, is how do you not shrink the park system? How do you expand on it, but at the same time, look at areas that if there's an over concentration of park, and because as you create new areas, now the park department is going to be responsible for that. That means that they're going to be spreading themselves even thinner than what they currently are. And we all know that increasing headcount is going to be a challenge here. So, one, as Mike pointed out, what is it overall that you want to spend? If you can come up with that amount, and we set that aside, it then requires the park department, along with council, to figure out, okay, what's going to be our approach now to spend this amount of money? Where do we want to start first? How do we want to engage Dawn and the administration to go out and tackle your agenda along with the administration's agenda and start to do it in a step-by-step process? At the same time, evaluating, okay, this whole overall park strategy, because as we all are aware, the city has shrunk dramatically. The footprint hasn't. Is it right to maintain, if there's 7 parks in one ward and there's none in another? Is it feasible that we should be maintaining 7 when maybe it makes sense to dismantle a park through some of this money and it becomes green space, and then deciding where you're going to create a new park because one doesn't exist, and that's going to cost more of that budget. But at the end of the day, you've established a equity, but it means in equity there is going to be some that are going to have to reduce their parks because there's too many within one area. But that has to be a consensus between all of you. But I would think if you start with dedicating an amount so that it's no longer on the table to be looked at for the rest of the funds, and then start having, because council at the end of the day is going to appropriate how those dollars get spent. So figure out how much you want to dedicate towards it, and then start with how you're going to use it. At the same time of working with a group to evaluate it so that you're all having input. But I think you, like Mike said, what's your dollar amount? Because that's what you got to live within. And then start with that. And then if something happens down the road where some of these dollars don't all get utilized, maybe then you say, well, you know how we had to move this to the side because we couldn't? Maybe that's where you reevaluate and say, okay, we're going to go back and reprogram that unspent money and we're going to add it to park. But start with a dollar figure. So that way you appreciate what it is that you're going to try to tackle.
You, Chuck, and Kyle, you're the only ones here from the administration. I know you probably don't have to answer this, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. How does this, or giving any amount of millions to the Parks Department, fit into the mayor's strategic plan for the city? Like, what is the mayor thinking about the parks for the city? If you can answer it.
Through the chair, the mayor understands how critical parks is to safety and to helping young people in the community steer themselves away from things that lead them to making bad choices. So yes, he's seriously on board with funneling resources into developing a infrastructure. But at the same time, he's conscientious that this infrastructure needs to be sustained, as you brought up. We just can't go out and add new parks and not take areas and start, maybe changing what that park looks like and making it green space and it not being a typical park, because we can't sustain all of it. So that's going to have to be a council working together and figuring out what parks potentially may need to be changed and not be that type of park that it exists now. Maybe it goes back to green space and it becomes part of no longer being a designated park.
Mike?
And we could also, if we did come up with a fixed dollar amounts that work within this, and say we allocate that and they're spending, the recommendation or they're spending, and they want $1 million for this park, this project, but 300,000 would be classified as youth prevention, and 700,000 would be parks. They could pull the 300,000 from that pot. We don't, this is what you have to work with. This is your budget. You can pull those to make your projects work if they fit those classifications. But we're saying we're setting this amount to make it work, and these are the standards we want. I think that's what we're all saying.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that, and I think that I don't want to call it urgency, but some of it we're ready. We have projects ready to go in terms of the Parks Department and living within that allocation fund, and that's why I wanted to add it to this agenda, because I wanted to just start moving on it, because Kyle, at our last meeting, you said we're still a month and a half, 2 months away from real decisions coming down from fresh spending. So, I don't want to keep waiting at this point. I want to start moving forward with this. This is something we already know that we already have going on, things to work with. And so if we can make that decision and move forward and start working on them, we should go online. Sasha?
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Because the audio is really loud on my end. It's hard to hear you guys. But you guys can hear me? Okay, so I just wanted to say a couple things. I think parks are extremely important. I actually, it's unfortunate and actually a little bit irritating that we're discussing ARP funding for maintenance of our parks. Our parks should be maintained. There shouldn't be broken equipment, whether it's us maintaining it by fixing it, or I guess even as Powell mentioned, maybe some parks, you know, need to be dismantled altogether. But to me, the ARP funding should be for enhancements. But at this point, we're past that. I think I agree. We need to set aside, you know, some kind of funding. And in terms of a maintenance schedule, we do need to think of one. I don't know how the parks are maintained. I know typically the rec centers and, you know, some of the bigger facilities are maintained, but in my ward, most of the park improvements were done through grants, not city funding. But I think at some point the city does need to just, you know, step in, and we need to have a plan. And I'm just in agreement. We need to set some type of dollar amount now, because a lot of us do have projects in the works. So we need to see what those are going to look like.
Anita?
Chair, Mike, you said it was 13 million?
That's one of the numbers, and these are preliminary, I just knows.
Ballpark,
Yeah,
no?
I think if we base it just off survey, it's 13.2 million.
I said a percentage.
16% of the 16% parks. But then that would just be, I don't know though if we should readjust these numbers off of the 14 million. Do we pull, or do we say we're spending within that too? Because that's, you know, do we take the 82 million and minus council's 14, minus what we've already spent, or do we allocate what we spent and then divide these out off of that?
No.
That's what I'm asking. You know, that, so just so we're giving the right amount. So if we say that we'll count, if Julia said I'm spending 2 million on parks altogether, then that goes against the 13 million. Do we categorize it that way? Because if you broke it down too, you could say that 2 million, you know, is technical to say, you know, if you divide the numbers 25%, 23%, 2016, 3%, it's 500,000 for crime prevention, 460,000 for neighborhood housing, 400,000 for public utilities and infrastructure, 320,000 for park, 260,000 for local recovery, and 60,000 city investment. That's by our 2 million. I mean, there's so many ways we could slice this. So I'm just, you know, what do we want our working number to be if we're going to set these standards? We want it to be 82 minus 14 and then work, or do we want it to be? I guess I'm saying, sorry.
I'm sorry, you look at this, I didn't know if you were.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't looking, but I mean, that's where I think we need to come to the terms is what guidance we want to back to the committee. Is it 82 minus the 14, and then we'll live within our guidelines too, to some degree, or we want it to all be off the survey? I mean, that's, I think we need to give them a little bit of framework.
Of course, I'm not gonna go with that, if not gonna $2 million. So.
No, I'm saying, how do we want to categorize, sorry?
Let's take it up from the 82 million, R14 plus this 13, and just make it 13, not 13.
Oh, we lost them.
13,
But it should be percentage.
did we lose somebody?
It blinked for a minute. I'm saying percentage, could we take the 82, you know, minus the 14, and then do the percentages off of that?
Yes.
Okay, we agree, I mean, is
I mean, that would be
that's what.
I'm only one
Okay,
person.
sorry.
My question is, did we readjust, thank you, did we readjust when they went through and disqualified, projects that were not eligible for ARPs? We have quite a considerable amount that they classified everything first, and then they classified everything first. What category it went into, it went into community youth and violence, it went into local recovery, and then they disqualified. So did they readjust? Did those numbers move?
Nothing's been allocated. Dollar amounts have been allocated by the category.
I'm saying, that's what, I'm not saying that, I'm trying to explain what I mean. So, before they disqualified projects, they qualified them into the categories of each of the parts.
It was the reverse. First we disqualified.
That's true.
And then, okay.
Right, because some of them we just
like,
knew.
right off the top, we I want to say, they didn't meet the qualification of
Right.
being even like non-profit and things like that. Oh, they're just outright commercial types.
Okay, so they just left these on the list that were not qualified, just so.
I think they, because I'm not sure, there's the
The
iteration
last
of this,
one.
right, that it keeps, I mean, don't get me wrong, the committee is trying to do their best, but there's a lot of information, and then we're going through the details
And we're only twice a month.
twice a month. But there's been some discussion that we're going to be bringing up legislation soon for infrastructure. And so the hope is, after the next meeting with Parks, and again, Parks is different. It's so broad. It's not like shovel-ready projects that infrastructure has. So that's why I think allocating and saying, okay, let's at least put aside so much. So then this process of you having meetings and talking about park and park only may make it easier, along with the administrations, to work together to figure out what it is that you want to accomplish.
Liz, before you go, just out of curiosity, if you don't want to say, you don't have to, did you, just wondering what you requested,
For,
just
as
total
a park
amount?
request,
Yeah,
I requested an amount of 1.5 million
for how many parks?
for Southfield House and Falls Playground.
Okay, just curious.
Now, all that might need to go to Southfield. So, which is not really what I expect, but
Yeah.
they asked for a request, I submitted a request for what we needed.
Yeah.
My question is how much does it cost to do a park?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, if a brand new park in Anita's ward, I'm 100% for it. But does that cost 500,000? Does it cost $1 million? Is it $2 million?
No.
Like, how much does that cost? And even Falls Playground, it's like, how much is it gonna cost to redo that park? I need to know those numbers, you know? And then Pasha brought up a great point. Just a few years ago, we were getting parks redone with grants. So what happened to that? You know,
But to the chair,
it
remember.
was a combination.
To the chair, with a grant, I mean, it goes through Chuck's department, I mean, it has to require, design, going out and bidding some of the, I mean, so that's why part of this process, I think it has to internally, we have to figure out what's the procedure going to be as we start identifying some of these areas that you want to tackle. Okay, maybe the administration needs to tell you, and Chuck would be that, I hate to say it, but everything's gonna funnel through Public Works. So, and then before it even gets to Board of Control, there has to be a scope of work to determine what someone's going to pay to make those improvements, and what are those improvements
So
going
does
to
it
be?
make sense, like if we was to allocate 13 million, and we put that within the Parks Department, then that's the cap, 13 million, you can't go back for more? Or if that isn't needed, do you then reallocate it because it's ARP funds, does that work the same?
Okay, what you allocating 13 is not it being finished, that's just, in essence, earmarked. You're gonna have to do legislation to spend each of those dollars individually. So how that gets done is gonna require a subcommittee for you guys to start talking about each of your parks and what it is that you want to accomplish, and then figuring out, okay, after you know what you want to accomplish, how do we then take it from paper and from ideas to getting it in front of Board of Control and Council for execution?
All right, I gotta go. Just, for the record, the communication thing, the juice is, it doesn't have to be the juice. Once I'll get to that, but I'm gonna come back in on,
Did you have a cost from him by chance?
it was somewhere around 48,000 a year.
Okay,
But I gotta do that every year.
You said 40,000 a year?
yeah. So, okay, go ahead, Mike.
No, and if, Julius or Anita has a park a design that worked, and I've got feedback to even the park on Glenwood, that YNDC, that's a small compact park, it has a basketball court. If we have an off-the-shelf or a design standard we could agree on, makes it a lot more simple to put out.
And that park was in the ballpark about, I think, about 175,000.
Glenwood?
I thought it was like about that, in that
Okay.
area.
So I mean,
Is
even
that-
if it's
Okay.
like
Yeah, I think it was,
200.
I'm sorry to interject. I think it was 150. I think you guys are correct. I think that park's 150.
So everything's gone up. everything's gone up, so let's say we could say a standard off-the-shelf base park that we all agree on, and I think this body could say, I think we'd all be able to say, this is what a park should look, bare minimum park should look like. If it's 250,000, then we can know, a plan. There's no reason, we don't have to reinvent these every time. I mean, this is what the city park should look like. If we don't have one, we want equitable placement. And then if, Anita says, okay, I want to use 200,000 more to do a trail, that's off of Anita's tab.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, 100%. So, but the thing, like, can we do something so that we can start?
Yeah, I think I think these numbers, what we've just talked about, we can go back to the group, because I've seen some preliminary stuff from what we've asked, some drafts on how we want to see scenarios, and that's where I'm coming with these breakdowns, the numbers. I'm going to say, if we agree from this meeting, I'll go back to the committee and say, take the 82 minus the 14, then allocate from there. That's what we're going to tell you that's what the guidance you're getting from this body, and we want you to live within those categories and those breakdowns.
Okay.
And if you shift them, if you say, and we'll leave it up to them, if they say 75% of this is community prevention and 30% is crime, and however they work their budget to make the numbers work, we're not going to be amenable to some of that, I think, as long as they're living within what we set aside. Does that make sense, everyone here?
Right, and through the chair,
Amina?
they understand that in the end, what they are doing are making recommendations. Okay, so whatever their recommendation, it still comes back to this body that says yes or no based upon the recommendation. Their recommendation doesn't stop us from doing whatever we end up needing to do. But it's good to have the recommendation.
But through the chair, then you're gonna have to go to the park then so that they're doing what you're asking too. I mean, you guys have all these ideas. Have you shared them so that the park's aware of what is Dawn aware of all of
I'll just
that?
give you example. Been working with Dawn for 6 months. Have an entire plan for the park, ready to draw down on that ARP funding to remove the broken equipment, replace the broken equipment, bare minimum. Put up lighting for safety. I'm ready to do that. I can't draw down from the ARP money yet because it's not allocated. When is it gonna be allocated? I have no idea.
But do you have a
but I
budget, so say.
I have a budget. I have quotes
13
from-
Okay, so
from
13 million, I'm just
Yeah.
hypothetically through the chair, 13 million was set aside. You're ready to come to council with a request, with a vendor that's going to do that work, that's a nonprofit, and you're gonna ask council to appropriate those funds, and then then we are going to, in essence, hand over to that nonprofit the amount of money, and then they're going to then turn around and provide us with all the paperwork that they spent to do that work. Because that ultimately is going to be what I'm gonna need from them, but there's going to be a grant agreement that we're trying to design in-house that they would be signing off on with a budget, because at the end of the day, that's gonna be my backup to say why we gave them that money. And then when they spend the money, all of the documentation they're gonna be given back to me is showing that they met the obligations of the agreement and they spent it correctly. And now I have met my compliance rules of saying, this is who we gave it to, this is how it was spent, I've got the paperwork to now send to the IRS.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
So,
Samantha?
thank you. Outside of items that are happening with us working with nonprofits, have we developed a procurement process for these dollars? So it says, okay.
No, for sure. I'm assuming that if you are asking somebody to do it, the park department is not doing it internally through the administration, that you're going through a nonprofit.
So it can be done internally, but there's a procurement process that has to be set up.
Through the chair, internally would require public works. I mean, that would be going out and bidding.
Right.
And finding, right, correct. There's a whole different process versus us potentially giving it to a nonprofit. But the nonprofit is going to have to sign this agreement outlining what this budget is, what they're planning to do, and how they're planning to spend it. And then they're going to have to, we're going to provide them with that funding. I'm going to report that we gave it to them, and then they're going to have to then, as they spend it, submit to me the documentation of supporting what they spent those dollars on. So internally to pay for labor and materials.
Mike?
Through the chair, I would hope that from a management standpoint, I mean, it's a lot of money. We have comptrollers and whatnot with CDBG, the minimum someone is assigned, or we have an attorney from the law department to monitor some of these compliance aspects, that.
Well, we've already internally, that's part of the, we're working on trying to figure out how we're going to be
Okay.
doing that. So, and right now, there is a document being shared internally where we think we have a template that what the party that we would be giving the funding to would have to meet these, meet the requirements of paperwork trail and signing off that this is their commitment because we're giving them those dollars.
Anyone on virtual?
I do, if I could just say this. Earlier, we spoke about the quality of parks in each ward. There's still, I think, what I notice is that it's more parks in some wards and less in others. So when you start talking about this, I think we should look at some solution to that.
Okay. Anita?
Through the chair, I just want to get, the option we have is like going to the nonprofit that you already have contact with.
Well,
But we can
I was
also go
paying-
through the city
the
itself.
city was paying for.
Through the chair, that's where the struggle, that's where the difficulty is, because you are the legislative body, we're the executive branch. We typically don't, per your instructions, spend funds in that manner. Usually we come to you asking you, can we accept this grant? We accept the grant, now it's our job to work under the guidelines of the grant, to spend the money correctly and report on it. This is different now. In essence, you're asking us to do work on your behalf. Not that it can't be done, but now we've got to figure out how are we going to do that on top of our other responsibilities of what we're doing within the administration. And so I'm just saying that that's why having a third party, nonprofit that has all of the checks and balances where they've utilized CDBG funds in the past and they know the reporting requirements and what is needed, that's going to be a whole lot more efficient for me, for you as a council member, and for that third party to, in essence, achieve your goals. That's where I would recommend first concentrating on it. If it doesn't work, then we've got to figure out internally how we're going to overcome some of those other obstacles that normally we do through the administration asking council for authority.
Thank you. But, and I'll go with whatever ends up being the best way to go, but I also know that we're allocating and we're spending $8 million for demolitions from ARP.
Yes.
Okay. You're not we're telling you what just like we said we needed these houses to be demolished, we're saying we need these parks and things to be completed. I don't see them as much different. It's like, we're spending the money. What is our process of spending the money for the demos? What's the process for spending the money for the streets? How does that differ? And I don't want to tie us up, but how is that so different than what we're...
Through the chair, it's not completely different, it's just now you're asking now Chuck to get engaged in now park development, where right now Chuck is doing, he oversees demolition, he oversees street, so it's like, it's just
You're talking
us.
about the work being powered.
Right, it's just us, it's just
Okay,
Chuck taking
okay.
on another whole new aspect of what he's doing.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I meant by that.
I'm sorry, Mike, I just want to say
Yeah.
thank you, because I wasn't clear what the problem was, but
That's
now
what
I understand.
that's what I meant.
Thank you.
Right.
But through the chair, that was the other thing I think where Nikki was asking in the ARPA meeting, was talking to council members and saying, what's coming down the pike from you? So they can react, similar to what Kyle's saying, because this isn't normal. Normally it initiates from us, or it's collaborative through the whole process, but here you're saying, I have $2 million I want to spend, so us sitting down with them and I said, we need to frame this, and if we're talking about the categories now we're talking about getting down deeper to what values we're talking about, and that's part of this. So I think this is a good discussion, because now Anita and I am taking notes, so we can go back and say, this is the structure, this is what we want you to work with it.
Can you go back to the, sorry, not to cut you, but finish.
No, and the mayor, like she did say, the mayor was very critical to me. He's like, thank you guys for your work, but council decides. But we want to make sure we're having a good dialogue, so it's not like we have a committee doing all this work, and then we're like, well, we want to spend it on a carnival, or something, a carousel.
Can you go back and tell them, like, we are ready for some type, it doesn't have to be the whole park funding, but some type of legislation to spend money on parks at this point in time? It doesn't have to be the whole thing. Portion?
and I'm okay with setting aside the 15 million as long as we begin to work our due diligence in creating this master plan and what we want to see and begin to move that forward. And if you have, like you already have a turnkey project ready to go, then you can draw down on that turnkey project while we, again, work through that master plan. You've already had your community meetings, you are ready to go. So I think that as long as we can do our reporting like it needs to be done, we can have a nonprofit come in and get an understanding of what they have to do so that we can report up to Treasury and be good for our Ohio audit. I'm fine with setting aside the 13 to 15 million, for the Parks Department. And I say 15 because I feel 15 is cleaner than 13, sorry. The 13 to 15 million towards the parks, and what we do, just like in demolition, we've set aside this 8 million, but if it's all contingent upon us getting a different grant, and those dollars can be moved again. So, reprogrammed. So, I don't have any fear of setting that aside and then us working. But as long as you guys know, let's work. I'm ready to go. So we can move that to the next point, and then we just get going. So we can get you where you need to be. So you can stop yelling about your no having and we can get Mike in swimming pool and Julius a zip line. So I'm good for that. Okay, Anita.
No, through the chair, I'm in agreement.
I think, yeah, this is good with
I think,
progress.
we should just set aside, let the ARP committee
Keep working.
keep working on it.
Okay. Online, anything, any final comments on allocating a specific amount of money for parks and playgrounds so we can start working? Okay, so we're asking for that legislation then from the committee?
I think I'll go back to committee with this. There's some notes of what they did based on what Nita and I asked for of the committee, and we'll tell them to take out the 14, show us what's spent, and then we'll come up with those amounts for those categories.
To the chair, because what's nice is we have a meeting next Wednesday. We don't have another council now to the end of May, so I mean, this gives Mike the opportunity and Anita to try to convey the message. So we also collaboratively start working on what it is that you guys are going to want to try to achieve, so that by that third week of May, you pass your legislation. And again, all that one is doing is, in essence, you're saying you're earmarking for park projects.
Exactly.
You're still going to be coming back and saying what each of those projects is going to be.
The other, through the chair, generally we do drag our feet, but we know we give ourselves a deadline like we're district. If we have to meet, we will meet and we'll produce it.
Yeah.
We will work against that. So I think when the onus comes back to this body, we'll do what we have to do.
So are we, to the chair?
Right, or Anita, sorry.
Mike, are we in agreement then with Samantha's $15 million?
I know it.
So we can let the committee know that this is the figure that we're looking at.
No, I would say it'll dictate, we have to take the 15, it was 16%, so taking the 82 minus our 14, and then 16% of the 68 would be what we were looking at.
I'll do that math for us.
16 times 68, so 1.16, so 10 is gonna be 6,800, half of that is gonna be 38, that's going to be 11, 12, 6 and that, so it's $13 million.
It's still 13, oh, it's still
$13 million.
15 is cleaner.
I'm not gonna argue about it.
Okay, so we're looking at a
13 to
between
15.
13 to 15, that's what you're going back, we did the math. And we're looking for that legislation to be presented by our May meeting, which is at the end of the meeting. This is what we've got projects ready. So we're good there.
So to the chair?
Yes, Anita?
So that we're looking at
Just
set aside
32 minus 14
$13 to $15
equals
million
68. You said
towards
13%
parks.
of that.
Oh, they said 16%.
Yes.
Oh, 16%, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know.
9.16.
Hang on, Kyle's redoing
Oh,
his
you're
math.
11 million, and then I added, so it's 11 million, sorry. It's 11 million.
It's 11 million.
11
So
million.
13, 12.
I'm 13, come on.
Okay, 13.
Well,
Somewhere within.
12 was the.
12.
Alright,
$12 million set aside. Okay, but that's our.
okay. So then the last piece on here, we have got proposed grant writer communications firm piece of legislation. This is also internal. We were presented with a few different concepts from various places. They're in front of you, two of them. And it's for us to decide, what we know we've talked during budget hearings that there were some internal things we wanted to address, one being our technology, one being, outfitting our chambers to be able to stream online, one being grant writing, one being better communications or ways to communicate. So, we were gonna the committee was gonna take this opportunity to lay out some of that stuff so that we can then create an RFP and actually, move forward with, with tackling some of those things or acquiring some of those things.
I was gonna keep that.
So the one that Julius gave us looks like it's more communications related. The one Anita gave us is communications and grant writing related. And then I think the third piece, separate though, would be probably technology, that we need an RFP for. Mike?
To the chair, I just would, as we're legislators, not want to get in the habit of, I don't know, I'm afraid when I see proposals, I don't want people bringing me proposals to some degree. And I understand, we can be the conduit for them to enter, but ultimately we want to say, okay, to the administration, here's a couple options or something. We're not the deciding body on that.
To the chair,
Anita?
this was sent to me and with no strings attached, and I think we should just use it like as a guide, maybe for some of the things that we might be looking for, but I would absolutely be opposed to that, any notion of signing anything like this here,
Okay,
and only going out to request additional proposals. There's zero commitment to this.
okay, thank you, all right. This is
Absolutely.
informational.
Yes.
I think council as a body, though, needs to talk to Rick Peak about if you are truly open about how you want to increase your communicative reach through council's actions. You need to, and you want to use ARP money, you need to start coming up with what it is that you want to do so that at least Rick is looking into it technology-wise to figure out what your budget would be so that you can get that appropriated so that whatever it is that you want to accomplish, you've got it laid out technology-wise. And so you're gonna have to engage Rick soon on that so that this stuff starts to get ordered and that you come up with, and he gets quotes and you figure out how it's going to work with your clerks and how what your end goal is technology-wise.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
No, I'm saying, but I'm not getting it from,
No,
this is not.
technology is the third piece that,
Oh, okay.
Valencia is working on separately.
Okay, so you are
This
working
is,
on, okay, so you're working through the chair, you're working down that path right now to come up with what from ARP you're going to want to spend to achieve what it is technology-wise with communicating to the public your goal.
Correct.
Okay.
And Anita?
To the chair, because ultimately, I don't expect to see another pandemic like this, but should something come up, we need to have the ability to definitely reach our community in the broadest sense. And that's the reason for this.
Through the chair, I think it makes a ton of sense. I just was wondering, where are you with, because you talked about it earlier in the winter about moving in that direction. I just didn't know as a group where you were with trying to come up with what your end approach is for technology.
Okay, so we have two separate things talking about. One is a grant writer for us that we used to have, then we no longer had in council, and then the administration tried to outsource it, and we didn't get access to it, and so we were talked to during budget to bring back some form of a grant writer the council can have access to, as well as the administration, whoever, but specifically council would be able to utilize. And then the second piece, which it looks like part of what Julius was presented with, can be worked into the technology piece that our clerks are working on to outfit us for better communications.
Through the chair, how are you planning to pay for the grant writer, because that is not in your budget, and we don't have any additional budget monies to move to cover that in council's budget? Are you, I don't know if that would qualify for ARP funds.
Anita?
Through the chair, it might not be in council's budget, but do we not have the ability to place it there? Or propose legislation that comes out of the general fund at the tune of about $50,000?
Through the chair, you do, but you then have to reduce 50,000, because remember, we ended with a surplus of $22,000. So I don't have on paper what we've submitted to the state, the room to do that, unless we put forth a new revenue forecast that says we have more than that to be able then to add this $50,000 in the current budget. Now, if we get to the summer and we say the council and the administration is willing to work together, and the administration is willing to find it within it by reducing or not spending some money, that can be accomplished. But just to say you want to allocate 50, I would have to generate a new revenue forecast to say that our surplus after what we passed the budget is greater than the $22,000 that we have given the county.
Anita?
I'm sorry, I'll be to the mic first.
Well, thank you, Nina, through the chair. I think some of this may be available. Like, we probably should make our want known better, or have a conversation with the administration, because I think we may have some existing contracts on the table with YSU or with another nonprofit we already work with that could be doing some of the grant side of this. But we don't have a good mechanism for us to ask for it. Where previously, and this was a while back, but when in the McNally administration, we had the contract with YSU, there was a better dialogue with us, and we were able to act. I don't know if any of you utilized that.
I recall that, the $200,000 you're talking about that we spent for it.
We had a contract, so some of these resources may be available and already be budgeted for. We're just not accessing them. So I think we probably need to articulate our wants, or say to the administration, or a communication. We want access to that. What existing contracts do we have, or do you have to go out for proposals? Because this money may be already allocated in a pot somewhere, or through. It may be in CPED, or it may be in a budget somewhere, or maybe in a contract you already have. We don't have access to it.
I don't think anybody does, because the water commissioner sat here during his budget hearings and said, I've never written a grant ever, and I don't have anybody to go to and write grants for. And then, the fire department told me Friday, we only have some grants. We don't have anybody to help us write grants. And
police uses Gale.
Police has their own individual one. So I don't think we have a good mechanism for grant writing across the city as a whole. And the YSU contract didn't work out because they ended up not spending all of that money. They ended up, we ended up not utilizing it. Why? I have no idea. Dropped ball there by, on that one. But we just had Sherrod Brown's office talk to the administration saying, please apply for more funding from us, and we don't have anybody internally to facilitate that, and that's the problem that we need to solve. And it's across the board. It's not there. It's not there. Anita?
Chair, I think maybe we should continue with this here, invite the administration back, like Mike suggested, and put this to the administration and say, we know we need a grant writer. I mean, literally, we have a contract with Gale, I think that's her name, right?
Yeah.
With the police department.
Through the chair, Council is a city employee. She is paid for, she is in a civil service position.
She's civil service? Okay, so if we can do that for one department, then surely we have to be able to figure out a way to do that for the rest of the city.
Through the chair. Right now, in the health department, they write their own grants. And because again, that's what they do to get the funding. Gail is responsible for some of the COP grants that we have. Some department heads, yes, they have to take on that role of submitting, and some department heads do not, like in finance. Finance isn't writing grants because no one's providing finance for grants. However, I helped a lot with the grant for that large one that the park department went after for McKelvey Lake. It was very cumbersome, and it took up a lot of my time. That is one of the difficulties is, we're already doing other jobs, and can we be chasing grants?
Perfect example.
But chasing a grant doesn't mean that the grant writer is the only person that does the work. He ends up going to that department head and inundating him with, I need all this information, which at the end of the day means I was thrusted into it, and now I'm diverting my time and efforts to work on that. So it's not just as easy as, well, let's hire somebody, because when we had YSU, that too was the problem. YSU was searching and helping to write, but it still requires details from the departments to engage what is required in the grant. So it's important that there is better communication, and I know that Nikki has been working with that with some of the department heads and coming up with a better strategy. So I think it's important that, yes, as Mike said, we have a meeting and we start talking about how do we improve on this process.
I did, to the chair, sorry. We did 2 grants in threw together 2 grants, one for $8 million for the incinerators for Senator Brown, and then a Clean Ohio Trail for Samantha's bike trail around White Park. And yeah, it's a lot of, we have people doing that, but they still come to you for information or for this or for costs or whatever. So it still takes time up, but I think more the planning of
though.
And I'm not saying we can't do it.
We're not going to do grants.
I'm just saying,
we did more of them.
what I'm saying is that if there was someone else heading that up, or a central body heading that up, whether it's a city employer, whether it's an outside agency, the grants would be more prepared to do the grants, because we would know about them in advance, and we wouldn't have to. It's the struggling at the last minute is what takes up my day.
That's what this is about. This is, and the organization, they'll do the heavy lifting if they have to, versus you doing the heavy lifting. Or if you already have it, if you already have it available, then, you can turn it over to them or not, but, it would solve the problem you literally just talked about. So anyway, I don't, we can't, council can only control our office. So that's why we were looking, this was proposed just to council to do it out of council. But if the administration is open to a larger conversation about it, then that's where we can go with this. Anita.
To the chair, there's a rush, but there's no immediacy. Okay, I just don't want to see this put on the back burner, because we all know that the city of Youngstown is losing dollars, and around us, they're taking the money, they're getting the money that should be coming here. So I just want to say, let's invite the mayor to our next meeting, see if we can make it with some chief of staff and whatnot, and get ourselves on the same page.
Okay. So we'll keep this grant writer item on our agenda for our next meeting. We will have to have a next meeting, another separate finance committee meeting. There's still a couple of pieces of legislation on our docket that we didn't want to make this meeting too long. So we left off some items of actual legislation to take up, so we'll have to do another one. So, okay, so then that's anything under unfinished business. So I have nothing here.
Hey, Lauren, through the chair.
Yes, Julius.
Would it be appropriate to have a conversation with the city's last grant writer? I think it was Sarah. She worked for like the Port Authority now.
Okay. Yeah. All right, that's done.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so now I need a motion for
To the chair, I make a motion to take ordinance 2256, 2273, and 22100 to the full body for further consideration.
Second.
Second.
I'm sorry,
Thanks.
Basha.
Thanks, Basha. Okay, and then for the, directive on the parks and playgrounds,
I believe, to the chair, that Mike and I have our directive from you, from our body, of what to take to the ARP committee next Wednesday.
okay? And then we will keep the grant writer communications firm item on our agenda for the next meeting.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, second. We are adjourned.